Hello, everyone. So now we're going to look at Module 2, and we will be considering general principles and virtues, and then also how we make decisions ethically. And so the current principles of the ethics code are, first, most important one, beneficence and non-maleficence. And so this is first, do no harm. This is in the Hippocratic Oath, right? Psychologists also value this as a very important part of their everyday practice. Fidelity and responsibility, trust, integrity, so acting with accuracy, honesty, and truthfulness. Justice, looking at fairness and equal access. And respect for people's rights and dignity. This includes the worth of every person, rights to privacy and self-determination. And the Holt et al. Reading on Blackboard talks about how these principles are applied by fields outside of psychology, which is really interesting. So as I mentioned in Module 1, there are some proposed changes to the principles within the ethics code. So what they're going to do, again, in theory, whenever this gets published, is they're going to split out beneficence and non-maleficence, make those each their own because they're so important. So beneficence being focusing on actively promoting well-being, and non-maleficence being an emphasis on avoiding and minimizing harm. Human and civil rights is a new principle that advocates for universal and equitable access to rights. Integrity and trustworthiness is expanded to include cultural competence. If you're going to treat someone who's from a specific subculture or culture, you better as heck know what you're doing. Justice and social justice combines fairness with advocacy for systemic equity. Respect for persons and peoples, which is a broader recognition of cultural and group identities. Scientific mindfulness, and I love that they're adding this. This is so important, which is a commitment to evidence-based practice and ethical research. We should be doing things based on psychological science. It just makes sense, right? And then environmental stewardship, which acknowledges the impact of environmental factors on well-being. All right, so we've got these principles. They're lovely, right? They're abstract. They're not enforceable like the codes are. We'll talk more about that later. How do we make decisions ethically? How do we sort of manage to decide what is the right decision to make? Well, there's a whole bunch of theories that we can use here, and these mostly come from philosophy. So Kantian ethics is that there's absolute obligations and universal principles that apply regardless of the specifications, the current situation. Utilitarianism or consequentialism involves a risk-benefit calculation when you go to make a decision. Communitarianism thinks about community goals and cooperative virtues. Relational ethics comes from Carol Gilligan and the feminist ethics of care. So this comes out of psychology. And it's based on relationships with others, empowering marginalized groups, and the importance of context. Social justice ethics, the goal is to change societal values and structures that perpetuate inequities. So don't work within them, work against them. Liberation ethics looks at social inequities and says that those are structural violence. And if you took my equity and access course, you know about liberation psychology, which is the idea that psychology's main goal should be to be working against oppression. The Ford and Richardson Blackboard article here has a review of the empirical literature up until that point. But honestly, for ethical decision making, again, because a lot of this is based on philosophy, it hasn't changed greatly since the 90s. So what steps do we take according to your Fisher book? So we want to identify the ethical issue. What is the issue? What are the nuances of it? First thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the APA ethics code. We'll look at the principles, we'll look at the enforceable standards, and then are there other related guidelines that might apply to our current situation? We'll look at local, state, federal, and international law. We'll look at what will be the outcomes effect of the decision. If we make this outcome, if we make that outcome, on the stakeholders. We'll consider alternatives. And then once we've made the choice, we will monitor and evaluate the results of our chosen action. So in the first chapter of the Hatcher, I don't know if it's Jacquin or Walken book, but their author order flips. And I just wanted to kind of go over and set up this book because it's such an interesting construct. So they took 133 participants. They collected both quantitative and qualitative data. You may have just taken Dr. Harrington's class related to those things, so that might be fresh in your mind. And they took 17 of the standards and they asked them, how do these apply to your day-to-day life? And so they really want to think about, how do we apply the ethics code beyond just a psychological standing? And is it a helpful principle, a helpful guide to life? So something really interesting to think about. That's why I like this book. It's why I chose this as your second book. And I hope you find it interesting throughout the semester.